Thanks for coming today,
Thank
Brad.
you for having me. Hi, everyone.
So when I called you up to talk about doing this, one of the things that you said right away was that brands doing no harm is kind of the table stakes, but that they have to do more now. They have to actually help bring about social good and a better world. That's a big ask, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's unfortunate. Well, it's fortunately, actually, the world that we live in. Unfortunately, though, being a marketer in a major company with a major brand right now is kind of sucky in a number of ways, because every day you're confronted with decisions where you either say, do I want my brand to be relevant or do I want my brand to be controversial? And there's virtually these days very little ground in between. And the videos that you played earlier is the risk as marketers we face. I happen to believe that a brand that is irrelevant is in much greater trouble than a brand that is controversial. Whether it intends to be, I don't know that too many brands, there are a few, but not a major group of brands, hold their hands up and go, today I'm going to be controversial. Often you wander into that ground unintentionally, as I have found out in previous experiences. But you have to kind of, it's not whether you go there, it's how you deal with it.
Can brand, there are some brands who would argue that, we heard the protesters earlier, that they do want to stay neutral because they want to be for everyone. Is that even an option?
So one of the things I was taught, like when I first started out in marketing like 30 years ago, obviously when child labor laws were a lot less stringent.
When you were
exactly. I was told, you think of a brand as a person, right? You're essentially building a profile of a person. How many of our friends don't hold points of view on things? Question number one. And how many of our friends hold points of view that might be different than yours? Question number two. And question number three is, when they do you absolutely go after them and attack them? And then do you call all your friends to ask them to like go after and attack them? No. You respect that they have a point of view that may differ from your own. You engage in some level of debate constructively, and perhaps that person changes their point of view, and perhaps they don't. And that's what brands, that's how I like to think about brands taking a point of view on issues.
So what can a brand do to mitigate risk? Is there such a thing as taking a strategic approach to taking a stand, or is it just follow your heart?
You know what? In most of the brand faux pas that have happened, and it feels like one happens every week now, what generally happens is if you dig into it, brands just kind of unwittingly wandered into that territory. Very rarely did they set out to be controversial. Certainly they didn't set out to offend people, but they wandered into that. My advice to you guys, who I believe most of the audience are marketers, is plan that it's going to have a backlash. Like just plan for that. And so what can you do to plan for it? Well, what is our response as a company going to be? That's typically something that you should think through before doing anything kind of major. But the second and much more important thing is, if something happens, who other than us is going to speak on our behalf? And part of the problem that we get into with these brand faux pas is all of a sudden you've got everybody, all the keyboard warriors hating on you, and then hating on the company, hating on you as an individual, and you have nobody out there kind of balancing the story. It's not cool. It's not chic to be putting the alternative side. We live in this kind of pile-on culture. So when you're doing that as a brand, line people up who are going to speak on your behalf to at least present a more balanced perspective. And look, if you've screwed up, you've screwed up. Apologize for it and just move on quickly.
Right. Some people get cynical about the idea, even when I've talked to some of my friends about what we were doing here today about brands as activists, right? Because at the end of the day, they're like, hey, you're just trying to sell me more toilet paper or beer. What's your thought on this idea? Because, and I guess also from the point of view of a brand, if you're becoming an activist brand, people are going to more cynically or potentially closely look at everything you do to say, oh, you say this, but you do this.
Exactly.
You're opening up a lot of,
along the continuum of like this irrelevant, dormant kind of brand that I talked about before, and an activist brand, there's a lot of increments there. And so I'm not necessarily advocating every brand becomes an activist brand. What I am advocating is brands should stand for something, and typically stand for something in society. And I think you're going to hear from Phil Picardi from Teen Vogue coming up on stage to talk about how more and more younger people want to know not just what a company makes, but what makes the company. And more they want to know what the individuals who make up the company stand for. And so I'm actually talking about standing for something. I'm not talking about necessarily going all the way to kind of being an activist. But I think more and more we're not going to have a choice, and here's why. For the same reason that younger consumers want to actually do business with brands that stand for something, our younger marketers want to work on brands that have some social purpose. So the more you constrain them and the more rules you put around them being able to express that, the less likely you're going to be able to get like this amazing talent. So I think accept it, understand that you have to stand for something in the world that we live in today. Make sure that to the degree to which you're possible, you line up the company so that nobody can ever, as what happened with Audi when they were kind of advocating gender diversity, and we discovered that their entire board and management team are white straight men. That was slightly unfortunate for them. But at least know where those gaps are so you can say, we know that.
Right.
And we're not saying that we're perfect, but we're saying we're on a journey as well. We talked earlier in the panel about transparency. Just be transparent in your response.
And to me, there's not, it's not necessarily always about controversy, because it's really just if you have values, it's about expressing your truth, right? And so for REI, it's not so much they're coming out against Black Friday, so much as they're just standing for what they stand for, which is that outside is better. But when you get to be Dick's, and I love the fact, and we were supposed to have Dick's CMO here, he unfortunately couldn't make it. They literally came out and said, we sold this kid a gun, and it's not the gun that he used in the shooting, but it could have been, and we have a responsibility to make sure it's not the next time. Absolutely.
And look, we all have to go home and tell our friends and family what we do for a living. And it gets harder and harder to do that when you don't really believe in what you're doing. And again, it gets back. For some reason in my generation of marketer, that was not as much of a problem. We could kind of pass out what we did in society from what we did in our careers. But for most younger people coming into companies like ours now, it is not, those distinctions are very blurred. And so they want their work life and their career to marry and reflect the values that they live their lives by. And therefore they want the brands that they manage, if they have the legitimacy to help move those issues forward, chances are they're going to lobby you to allow them to do that.
Yeah. So I've known you for a long time, back from when I was editor of Ad Age. And You've always been someone who personally came out and took stands. You often spoke at industry conferences about things that you saw going wrong or things you took issues with. How important is it and Nola just talked about kind of it coming from the top, how important is it that individuals within companies have strong voices on these matters? Is it that as important as the company itself taking a stance?
So I happen to believe that, again, that thing that I was just saying, kids today want to know not what the company makes, but what makes the company, and then what makes the people behind the company. They want to know what I stand for. When I was at PepsiCo running some of our most high-profile brands, people wanted to know what I stood for. There's one caveat, though, that I try and live by when I do comment on things like that. And as Nola mentioned before, I was one of the people who started this CES So White movement when it was revealed that the panel of speakers this year at CES were all white straight men. No, they were all white. Well, I don't know that they were all straight, but they were certainly
white and men.
Mostly white, and there was Asian American. And I started that, but I did it in a specific way. I started at least in a specific way, and when they ignored me, I just got increasingly pissed off and agitated. But I started by saying, hey, you've got a problem. Can I help you? I know tons of amazing women in tech who would love to stand up and speak at CES. Can I introduce you? Silence. Oh, okay. So let's try again. More silence. Okay, so let's get more of my CMO friends on. Kristen Lemkow from JP Morgan Chase, Antonio Lucio from HP. And still it was ignored. And so what I try and at least do is not just shit on everybody all the time, because it's so disheartening to be on the receiving end of it. And then I want to say one more thing that I'm trying to say at all conferences with marketers. But to actually be positive, to kind of go, this sucks, here's what I can do to help you, DM me if you're interested in helping. And the final thing I'll say to this kind of esteemed audience of marketing people, when next week or the week after, and trust me, it will be one of those weeks, we see another brand faux pas go on, here's the first thought that should run through your mind. The very first thought that should run through your mind is, but for the grace of God, go I. Because everybody in this room who manages a brand is 20 seconds away from something like that happening to them. So, but for the grace of God, go I, be your first thought. And then your second thought goes, is there any way I can reach out and help? So when the Dove issue happened, shortly after an issue that I was associated with, don't laugh, I reached out and I said, hey, hang on, Twitter sphere that is shitting all over a company that has advocated for women, advocated for the positive reinforcement of women, done things to enable that in society. Before we jump all over them to say this 12-second piece of footage abstracted from a 60-second piece of footage is really the penetrating insight into the truer, deeper, darker soul of Unilever and Dove, let's all just take a breath and say, do we think that, did they screw up? Maybe. I'm not convinced that they did. Did they really mean to? Did they set out to unravel 30 years of work? No, they didn't. So cut them a break. And if you're a marketer, reach out to help. Tweet some positive things about them. Please don't pile on. It's horrible to be on the receiving end of it. It's horrible. Your friends and family, you're ashamed when you go home to your friends and family. It's not cool. And it's unnecessary, and everybody in this room has the power to put positive energy into the Twitter sphere. So click with compassion.
Great note. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.